welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jen.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Welcome to Season 5. We have made it through 4 seasons and we are excited to start our 5th season of episodes and interviews where we get to talk with amazing music theorists and teachers from all over the country and even the globe, perhaps. And as has been the case for the past few months, we are still being sponsored by the Texas Women's University School of the Arts and Design. So thank you, TWU, for helping us keep the lights on and bringing more music theory, pedagogy goodness to your earbuds. Our guest for today is none other than Dr. Frank Lehman. He is super fun, super knowledgeable about film music, writ large, and we have a great conversation about film music and how we can include it in the curriculum and in our pedagogy. But before we get into this conversation, let's learn a little bit more about Frank.
Frank Lehman is an associate professor of music at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. He is the author of Hollywood Harmony, Musical Wonder, and the Sound of Cinema with Oxford University. And he is the editor of the recent publication from this year, Film Music Analysis, Studying the Score, which was published by Routledge. Frank is active in the public musicology community, and he has seen his work featured in venues including the Chronicle of Higher Education, NPR, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. He is currently finishing his next book, The Skywalker Symphonies, Musical Storytelling in Star Wars, which is contracted with OUP.
I happen to have, a big library of musical themes that exhibit various topics of the day, mode mixture or cadential archetypes or scales or whatever. And Hollywood and screen media is, it's like your one-stop shop for vivid, very catchy and culturally recognizable musical symbols attached to very concrete theoretical or technical resources.
Well, Frank, we are thrilled to have you on the podcast to talk about your work. As you don't know this, but you are episode 1 of season 5, and so we are thrilled to have you as our first guest for our 5th season of Note Doctors podcast. And before we get to talk with you about your great work with music theory and film music, we always like to ask our guests a little bit about how they got into music theory. You know, you've done so much work with John Williams. Was watching Star Wars inspiring you to be a music theorist, or did that come along maybe later down the road?
Oh, I don't know. Well, first I should say thank you all so much, Paul, Jen, Ben, for having me on your podcast. I'm an avid listener, and it's a real thrill to be invited to speak with you today. So I hope I live up to that hyping that you just did there.
Wait, hyped you up here, Frank.
Yeah, no. Well, I don't know that there was any immediate realization that I was born to be a music theorist when I first saw Star Wars, because I was in 7th grade back then. Maybe I didn't have a conception that there was such a thing as academic study of music, but it certainly was a formative experience for me, and my exposure to and love of film music and symphonic music goes back even further, to elementary school. I've always been just absolutely fascinated by musical structure, and was humming John Williams music before I probably even was able to speak. It was like the NBC News logo theme, da 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 da, which I think they still use. That was written in the early '80s, and it was like a clarion call that it was time for me to take a bath when I was a baby, growing up. and that's probably my most significant life-determining musical encounter among many, or at least the first of them, with his music and with, I don't know, film music, television music, multimedia music, more broadly speaking. Yeah, it's been a part of my life for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And so what led you to studying music theory? Were you like a pianist or a choir kid, or perhaps in band or orchestra? And then how did you find yourself then going into theory?
Yeah, a couple of those things. I was, I don't know if I would call myself a pianist. I can play the piano, but I never considered myself a performer. And I was also in school band playing clarinet. And was also slightly interested in composition starting in high school and a little bit through college too. I had, maybe it was a delusion that I could one day write music for film, and I explored that a little bit in college. But the more written and I suppose technical side of things always appealed to me more, and I think I had more of a natural knack for writing about music and sort of getting into the weeds with musical form and progressions and intricacies like that. I didn't have much of maybe I didn't give myself a chance to really just establish it, but I didn't feel like I had much to say as a composer. It was more the sort of the mystique of writing for film music, which of course was based partially on my fascination with film composition as a soundtrack collector and a devotee of movies and music and television too. And that goes back, again, all the way to childhood. I was a voracious consumer of, I guess, mostly tape cassettes at first, of both the sort of symphonic repertoire and also film music. And I didn't make that much of a distinction as a kid or teenager between the two genres. You know, to me, it was just great storytelling, really vivid and colorful and exciting music that became part of my, way of being in the world. And it was only until, well, I guess, formal study in college that it began to dawn on me that there had been this very strict delineation, critically, culturally, between those two spheres, which is something that I've tried in some ways to break down, or at least to better understand what differentiates at the end of the day what Beethoven or Wagner was doing versus what Jerry Goldsmith or Bernard Herrmann was doing, for example.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting that film music sometimes has that distinction. I feel the same way. When I was a kid, I didn't think of them differently, and I consumed lots of classical music as a horn player. I was in youth orchestra and things like that, and I didn't conceive them as different things. But an academic college music program will sort of teach you that they are, even if they really aren't. And one of the things, when we've asked people throughout the now heading into 5 seasons of this, what is an overlooked kind of music? Film music is one that comes up a lot. Like in 100 years, we'll be studying those scores as part of our theory class. And I think film music, I just last weekend was at Dallas Symphony Orchestra. They were playing all of the music while a Harry Potter film showed. It was so much fun. It was 100% sold out. There was not an empty seat in the room. The orchestra loved it. You could tell. Like, they were laughing, while the movie played. They were having a really good time. And I've sung for those films as part of that, too, before. And it's just delightful. It's so much fun to sing. And it's very, very hard. It's often very, very hard. Your cues are hard to get. The music itself can be very complex. So I think it's just totally a false concept that these are different in some way.
I agree completely. And not to rag on certain aspects of, say, the operatic repertoire, but if you're concerned about the sort of ridiculousness or childishness or incoherency of like the plots or subject matter of like Star Wars or Harry Potter, I hate to tell you, but it doesn't make a lot more sense, or isn't even necessarily that much more philosophically elevated in The Ring or Traviata or Puccini or whatever. I mean,
Amen.
You're totally right.
I'm always here to rag on opera. So yes,
but I say this with the greatest respect and affection for opera, but I think that also translates to taking film music for multimedia seriously. Mm-hmm. And absolutely what you say about the sophistication and challenge of rendering film scores in that live-to-picture setting, which is something that almost every orchestra that has a sense for its financial longevity at this point.
Yes.
And cultural relevancy and appealing to new generations that they're pursuing. It's not every, I have to say, it's not every film score that I think lends itself to a rewarding live-to-picture performance, but things by John Williams are written very graciously for instrumentalists. It's a combination of idiomatic writing and complexity and plenty of solos or showcase cues. It's also an amazing just feat of endurance because the average film score is recorded over the course of several days, if not weeks, in a Hollywood studio orchestra where they can do a dozen or so measures and then re-record it or get this take right, as opposed to like a 2.5-hour movie sometimes with essentially wall-to-wall scoring that was not written like, say, a Strauss opera, which are similarly demanding, but at least he wrote with breaks in mind for the brass players or whatever, or the chorus. It's an incredibly complicated and taxing and probably exhausting, which makes it all the more exciting, I think, to hear in that setting.
We've done Amadeus as well, and I sang for that one. And what was, I think, the most challenging about that one is moments where you're supposed to be singing something very full, but because it's happening under dialogue, you have to be very quiet. So you somehow have to sound like you're singing in full voice, but actually be singing pianissimo or something, So there's all these wild things like that. But often the cues, like in particular, getting your note as a singer in that environment is very hard. The music is very complicated. It's very complex. And like you said, you're singing for across a long period of time with very few breaks. Or if you do have a break, you're in total darkness. And sometimes you can't even see the screen that well, and you're just waiting for the conductor to be like, "You go."
I'm just glad that they're including choirs in some of these live-to-picture performances because the alternative, I guess, is to have a MIDI patch or a pre-recorded version. That just doesn't do the trick. I think if we're going to pay real homage to these scores, it might as well be the full complement of voices that were recorded in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also saw Hedwig's theme was on the call list for Dallas Symphony Orchestra violin audition.
I love that.
Yeah.
There's
it's an excerpt.
Quite a few pieces from Harry Potter. I think it's now a kind of audition piece for string players and flautists. The little solo bit in Azkaban is a real tour de force, and keyboardists. I mean, the celesta material and the main theme is like whoever was assigned that, in 2000 to play. Most Hollywood performers for film scores, they're contractors who are given their parts then and there and have to sort of sight read. I think in the case of Harry Potter, though, it was perhaps Randy Kuber. I'm not exactly sure who was the keyboardist in that score, but he got his hands on the parts a few days beforehand, and Williams said, "You may want to check this out. Just give it a little. Perhaps it's a little bit more technically demanding than the average. Like Hans Zimmer style. No repetition or organ part for Interstellar, which as wonderful as those are, they're maybe not as virtuosic as Williams writes."
Well, I guess we should turn to what I'm holding in my hand right now, which is the first edition of Film Music Analysis.
I don't know about first edition. I don't have any plans of doing a second edition. If Rutledge asks, I suppose I could.
You're putting it out into the universe, man.
Yeah.
I hinted at that in our pre-episode correspondence that maybe a second edition would be in store. But yeah, maybe Frank, since you're the esteemed editor of this collection, you can tell our listeners a little bit about it, and those that are interested in ordering or exploring it more. I got an instructor copy, and I tried to absolutely race through all 300 and some pages of it. I'm not all the way through yet, but wow. Speaking of tour de force, I think this is one. It's a really nice collection, but I'll let you speak to it.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's very, very kind of you to say. And it was a labor of love, like I think what all of us do at the end of the day, hopefully is. I had the idea of this book 2018, 2019, and the great misfortune of pitching it and getting it accepted right as the pandemic hit. So it may have hit shelves a few years earlier had circumstances gone more favorably. But I hope it was worth the wait. I'm tremendously proud of it, and I think, I mean, there was always lots of different impetuses for complicated multi-author volumes like this. Part of it is I just wanted to bring together what I felt was a kind of growing critical mass of film musicologists, or not film musicologists, film music theorists, sort of card-carrying, credentialed, and with PhDs or whatever, people who identify first and foremost as music theorists, but who specialize in film music or screen music. And for a long time, I don't think that was really possible. I mean, there were isolated voices for sure. Your David Neumeyers and Jim Bueller's, and quite a few people who are either contributors to this book or the sort of big shoulders that we all are standing on here. But it's only within the past 5-10 years, I think, that maybe has something to do with the formation of the Film and Multimedia Interest Group at SMT that brought these folks together. But I felt a real opportunity not just to have a bunch of exciting scholars, but exciting scholars from different stages in their careers too. That was the point that I made when pitching this to Routledge, that it would be nice to have, both established, senior scholars and people just starting out on their academic journey. And they may be further along in their academic journey after it took 5 years to get this published, of course. But I think that it represents a diverse view of approaches, perspectives, certainly methodologies, and hopefully it's also readable. Like that was another major thing. Mm-hmm. My sense of what is readable, of course, differs from like the average Joe on the street. But I really insisted on our authors that make it as accessible as possible, but don't dumb it down. I mean, that's kind of disrespect. That's the whole idea, is to take this repertoire seriously. And if that means, going real deep into like Scott Murphy's extremely intricate kind of taxonomy of harmonic progressions, that requires a little bit of mental legwork to wrap your arms around, but it's totally worth it. And it's part of simply, I think, doing this repertoire justice and showing that there is the kind of analysis and understanding that you get from it for this repertoire is just as high as anything in the more established repertoires for analysis, not just classical music for that matter, but jazz. I think we've sort of accepted that we can go real deep into jazz analysis, or even pop music analysis. That's a good 20 years worth of kind of disciplinization going on there. Didn't quite have that with film music though, so hopefully this accomplishes it.
Oh, Ben, do you have a favorite chapter?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm biased because Scott Murphy's chapter on heroic chord progressions uses a lot of the same examples from my Texas SMT paper that I did with Sean Yoon, and I really enjoyed reading that simply because I think several people were coming to a similar conclusion on this type of writing, or what I had suggested, and he doesn't suggest this at the end of his chapter. If you read it out there, you'll find it very interesting, and I really agree with Frank that every chapter is very accessible. You do not have to be an expert in timbre to read the first chapter. You will get the front loading that you need to understand the articles, and that's really there's a really artful way of doing that, and I think every one of the authors did a really good job of that. But I had talked about in my Texas SMT that the modern day superhero, or maybe even just the hero in general in a more broad sense, sometimes doesn't have to come face to face with a villain all the time. That a hero's task can maybe be putting the world back together. And that necessitates a different kind of heroic theme or motif. And that's something that I think is something we can all think about in our future research.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting topic, and it's bigger than any one article. Not just on a harmonic basis, which is what Scott is sort of looking at, the way that within the past decade or so, the chordal relationships that we associate with heroism, which previously been major and fairly constrained to one or two modal inflections, has really shifted a bit in its contours, and part of it has to do with the feeling of maybe exhausting a certain cliche and moving on to another one. But yeah, it's an interesting larger issue. It also extends to theme and timbre and all sorts of other parameters. I mean, we don't necessarily hear these long sort of periodic or elaborated musical melodies anymore as being calling cards for heroes. It's either quite clipped and motivic, or maybe not even melodically memorable, but that the duties of sort of signifying heroism then get transplanted into very widely recognizable harmonic associations. And I think that's a nice message, a nice takeaway from Scott's chapter, among many things.
Yes. Yes, and he has his own taxonomy for listing the number of semitones away between triads. So it's not necessary to even know Roman numerals to read this chapter and get a lot out of it. And it's a really interesting question that he raises. Do you really need to use Roman numerals at all?
Yeah.
It's a really good point.
Always worth challenging some basic foundational assumptions of our field, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, Roman numerals is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you talk about the lack of melody in more perhaps contemporary film music, that reminds me of this video that I saw on YouTube a number of years ago where it was like a man on a street kind of interview, and he was asking people to, hum the Indiana Jones theme or Star Wars theme or Harry Potter, and then he was like, well, hum, and everyone could do it, all the people that he was interviewing, and then they're like, well, hum the theme for Avengers, or the Fast and the Furious or something, and like they were like, no. It's really... And so what's do you have a kind of take on like maybe how things have changed? Is it doesn't necessarily be good or bad, but things do seem to be different, at least. I guess there are some different trends.
I agree, and it's hard to sort of attribute it to just one shift, although there are a couple filmmaking changing aesthetics that happened roughly around the new millennium, about not just what the score should do, but what, as Ben was saying, what heroism is supposed to be represented as in cinema. I think it's probably epitomized in not with like any negative spin or anything, but the Batman Nolan franchise work from Hans Zimmer with sort of nominal contributions from James Newton Howard in the first two films, and it's very clearly differentiated what he wrote and what Zimmer did. But they are thematic, right? We can go through and track Batman's theme, but the most salient material is very let's say efficient, or maybe optimized is a better way of saying it. Sort of this minor third oscillation.
I think it's Brahm or Bram.
The Brahm,
Brahm, right. That's the technical term.
And so some of it may have to do with the rigors of modern digital editing, which can, because of the ease with which things can be recut and often are right up to the last minute, and the overall faster pace of editing that might in some ways prohibit these long breathed melodies that were more of a mainstay in classical Hollywood or its revival in the 1970s, which is not to say that those were not also constrained by editing. I mean, it's all subordinated to that ultimately. That plus perhaps some slight embarrassment or feeling of suspicion towards big extroverted, tuneful, cheesy. I mean, there's a shelf life on everything. So what was big and popular in the 1980s with a Spielberg movie probably feels a little bit dated or can't be done without having a kind of self-awareness or referentiality nowadays. But these things are also cyclical, so perhaps we're due for a change back to big, long, 16 measure long melodies. And we see those too. It's not as though there aren't places to find lyrical thematic writing in Hollywood or screen music more generally. Just look at what John Powell did with the How to Train Your Dragon series, which is, a lyrical feast, and he's justly famous for that. But he was also capable of doing something more in the atomized and small scale motivic design of like the Bourne Identity films, which is another milestone in the kind of updated non-hummable on the street kind of style of music and multimedia writing.
I'm going off script here a little bit, but one of the barriers often to including film music in class or to maybe even analyzing film music is, of course, that the scores aren't as readily available. And so you have to do your own work when it comes to writing it out, transcribing it, finding all the voices, all of those things. And that is this added kind of layer of labor. So, yeah.
Yes, that's been a challenge that I don't want to say has bedeviled me personally, because I really love transcribing, and
you're so humble. You're so fast and brilliant at that.
Well, that's another thing that I've been doing since I basically could play the piano. Right, I picked out stuff by ear and played it, and I don't have absolute pitch, so I was always sort of getting the keys wrong, but the progression's correct. Which maybe is why I became a Neo-Romanian ultimately, right? But
you're just a PL transformational way.
Exactly. Right? Key doesn't matter. It's only the inter-triadic relationships that do. But you're absolutely right that it remains a challenge, I think, for really for the flowering of screen music analysis and theory that it could otherwise have. There are signs that it's changing. I mean, there are a few book series of nicely edited orchestral scores of select movie scores, a few from Denny Elfman and Jerry Goldsmith, and not a lot of classic Hollywood, not a lot of international film, not a lot of, no John Williams besides the sort of concert arrangements, which is a different genre. It's useful, but it's not, if you're trying to understand how a composer underscores a scene, then going to the suite from Jaws or whatever is actually not going to be that informative. Right. So, but this book, I mean, we all 12 contributors prided themselves on their transcriptions and their, I hope accurate, at least on first approximation they were. And some of the chapters are maybe less notation dependent than others. It was a very conscious choice to begin the book with Chelsea Oden's chapter on timbre, which, I mean, if we had all the bells and whistles, this would be a full color book with links to spectral analyses and things like that. We can kind of hint at the versatility of that style of analysis through her work, but also her prose is simply so evocative and suggests a way into understanding film music that not only is it really exciting and speaks to your experience, but talk about like the importance of a given musical parameter to film music. Timbre, of all things, is so relevant. Maybe it's the most important thing, especially in contemporary film scores, which oftentimes, if they're not driven by periodic, quadratically formed melodies, it's about the sound world that they're creating, and maybe uniquely for that film, sort of ambient or minimal or textural or spatial sort of sound design. So, yeah, I think it would have made sense, regardless of who the author was or what their case study was, to start with timbre. But with Chelsea herself writing as such a skilled sort of lyrical prosmith, and the evocativeness of the Harry Potter movies, which is what she focuses on there, I think it was a gift to me as an editor to have that as the first movement of this thing.
Yeah, piggybacking on that thought, while I was reading Chelsea's chapter, I thought about the experiment that Paul mentioned, which was asking people to recall the theme from Star Wars or something, the main title from Star Wars. I thought if you were to replicate that interview study, could you play, let's say, Hedwig's theme without the celesta? Or could you play something completely different but use the celesta and use the same kind of collection of timbres to make someone feel as if, oh, does this sound like Harry Potter to you? You know what I mean? Or something like that.
I'm pretty sure you could, based on seeing other music written since the Harry Potter franchise that foregrounds celesta or kind of a tinkling timbre, and people say, oh, that sounds a lot like Harry Potter, right? Even if there's no melodic connection. And then the melody is, it's weird. It is an earworm, but it's weirdly constructed.
Tchaikovsky's in the background going, hey, wait a minute.
Of course, yeah. I mean, there's this whole, long chain of cultural references as well that Williams and other film composers are of course, both tapping into and reinforcing and evolving as well, right? That's how this stuff stays relevant.
And it is something that you don't need, going back to your point, Jen, you don't need a ton of score analysis to talk about, to be honest. You can totally address it with an audio example of a really cool cue, and you can get directly into kind of the timbre and the way it's put together, the texture. I mean, even form. A lot of the film cues that I've used in class, it's easy to talk about form. And even like if you get into the harmony, it's a great opportunity to challenge your students to really figure it out in the moment, or what is it? Was that the modally mixed subtonic that went to the dominant? Oh, listen to that. It's an interesting type of half cadence,
Yeah, right.
Stuff that happens pretty frequently in film music. You can talk about, it's accessible, right? There are things that are obviously more down the road, but there are things that are very, very much accessible without a lot of score references. And I think that's kind of a cool way to include film music in your class.
Yeah, and that's certainly how I apply it in sort of music theory classroom, music theory for majors type courses. I happen to have, a big library of musical themes that exhibit various topics of the day, mode mixture or cadential archetypes or scales or whatever. And Hollywood and screen media is, it's like your one-stop shop for vivid, very catchy and culturally recognizable musical symbols attached to very concrete theoretical or technical resources. It's like I joke that you could have an entire course in ear training, or at least interval training, just based on like the themes from John Williams, or more recently, I don't know if you're familiar with the Amazon Rings of Power show, which I will go out on a limb and say I'm a big fan of. I feel like this is a controversial stance for some reason, but at least on a musical basis, it is absolutely sublime. I sort of boost Bear McCreary scores every time I hear it. And he wrote, it's a big library of leitmotifs for that, as you would expect for a Tolkien-based TV show. And every one of the 24 themes has a distinctive opening musical interval. There's one that has an opening perfect fifth. There's one that has an opening perfect perfect fourth. There's a major sixth. There's it's all done in both directions too. And it was quite conscious on his part to help make these things as differentiated as possible. It's like, well, sometimes the side of applied music is actually really working to help us out on the side of pedagogy too. It's all we have to overcome is the fact that maybe there's a copyright issue in replicating some of the stuff in the classroom, but we don't need to,
No.
As long as no one complains, who cares, right?
Don't worry about that.
One question I had, I know this was in our pre-show conversation, was, how do you see your book impacting, theory classrooms or curricula, or how does it fit in? Because it's not necessarily tied to, the core theory sequence. It's not necessarily a textbook for a film music class either. How does it kind of fit into, what our teaching loads are, or what we're doing in a semester by semester basis? How do you kind of see it fitting into that? Or is it just a separate thing entirely? Maybe that's the answer.
Well, maybe a little bit of that. You can write a book with the most high-minded hopes for how it is adopted, but people are going to use it in the way that they find useful. So it could be that the random Joe on the street picks it up and finds it without being a student or specialist in music theory. I never know. Maybe Rutledge is trying to promote it that way. I don't know. I think the more obvious use cases, which I think I articulate, at least I articulated in the book proposal, I don't remember if it's actually part of the introduction, is that this would be good in a sort of upper division music and moving image class. Hopefully people will take it who have an interest in learning the sort of technical side of film composition, and in that way it actually may be useful in an applied sense of giving a certain kind of inspiration to people writing music for TV or games or film. So yeah, like in a course where folks could be assigned a single parameter like timbre or rhythm, and without having to sort of reinvent the wheel or discover a discourse that doesn't even necessarily exist. I mean, there are isolated cases of people talking about, say, topics in screen media, but Janet Bourne's chapter is I intended for her, and she delivered, to provide a kind of synopsis of not just topic theory in this very narrow musical theory sense where it's been applied and sort of conceptualized for 18th century music for the most part, but as a wider idea that could really spur future discoveries or analysis of writing, a term paper or a seminar paper or a grad thesis, or who knows what on that subject. So yeah, I don't know if there's one ideal use scenario, but people will have to discover that for themselves.
I am curious to know, like, what are some of your kind of go-to uses in a theory classroom, maybe like a 1 through 4 type of scenario, theory or oral skills, where like I really love to use this excerpt from this score or this film to illustrate a topic or two.
Yeah. So I'll issue a little challenge to myself and not just talk about John Williams examples. Like I said, that's too easy. For suspensions, I generally use Hans Zimmer. Pirates of the Caribbean is, I think, a familiar enough that the kids could get kind of excited when they see that listed on their handout. By the way, I also don't use textbooks. I started off doing that, but have since just generated so much material on my own that it's all based on my little worksheets and handouts and things like that. So yeah, like suspension chains are a frequent aspect or frequent feature of Zimmer's music. Real telltale sign, actually, of a composer that sometimes people will argue, I think, in error, that his music is anonymous, but in fact it's only anonymous sounding because it's so dominant in our and so frequently copied that you might mistake it as being just a status quo or default musical but it's very interesting, and so he is enamored with musical suspensions and inner voices especially. So that's one example. Yeah, no, there's too many to name, and there's this wonderful resource. I don't know if you know about it. It's Brent Jorgensen has put it together over. It's still a work in progress, but the Max Steiner Digital Thematic Catalog, which is hosted by BYU, and he's done the sort of impossible in rendering a huge amount of Max Steiner, the preeminent composer of Hollywood's golden age, rendering a huge amount of those scores in MIDI notation with features flagged both on a musical basis, like modal mixture, augmented sixth chord, things like that, but also on dramatic uses. So I think as I continue to, with his blessing, of course, as I continue to develop my own musical corpus of examples, having something like that on hand is going to make my and potentially other people's lives much easier, since, as you all know, one of the most time-consuming parts of putting together a music theory session is getting the exact right example to demonstrate the feature that you're talking about, and not to have it be too subtle or sort of in ways that we as theorists can appreciate doesn't quite adhere to exactly my problem is with the sentence form in thematic structure, right? The characterist example there is that's always offered as the opening subject of Beethoven's first piano sonata, right? But that ends on a half cadence and it modulates. It doesn't feel like a complete musical thought. But you know what does, and I'm immediately going to regret having said that I'm not going to talk about John Williams, because the Imperial March from Star Wars is...
I knew it. I knew that was coming.
Okay. Now, but I have to... And here comes the hedging, too. There is disagreement, I suppose, about how to categorize that theme in terms of its Kaplinian structure. Mark Richards, the scholar who did that wonderful article on film music themes, maybe he calls it a varied clause or something. One of his, he has a more sort of developed and slightly idiosyncratic conception of musical form that includes sentences, but also things that don't exactly follow the Kaplinian archetypes. So, he may disagree with my characterization, but naively it is a sentence. At least it has an idea, it repeats it more or less, and then it fragments, develops sequences and cadences with it.
Yeah, I like to use happy birthday, but then the problem is when it gets to the fermata and you stop on that 4 chord.
Right.
You're like, oh, well,
maybe,
you can always
in
put
the
a fermata in there. A very clear B-I, of course.
Yeah, if only composers wrote from the theory first, right? If only we could have switched that up and be like, okay, you're gonna write a sentence and you need it just so, rather than the other way around.
I don't think we'd all like it as much.
Right.
It'd be a lot less interesting.
I think it would cost our jobs because everything would be so simple to analyze that there would be no more need for us theorists to come up with excessively fine distinctions and edge cases and things like that.
That's a really good point. That's a great point. Well, this has been super fun, Frank, to chat with you. And we hate to end so quickly, but unfortunately, we're now recording during class times, and
Right.
so we're at the mercy of our schedules.
Bring your students in. I think that would be a fun exercise.
Actually, that could be quite
If
fun.
they want to see how what it really means to be a music theorist in
Right.
the 21st century. Like, it's podcasting. It really, I mean,
That's right.
take it from me. This is actually a really great way to reach audiences.
It's true.
We do every once in a while find out that a student does listen to one of our podcasts. Yes. They'll mention something that they heard, and so that's very nice. But we always like to end with a little rapid fire segment where we get to ask you each one just a off the cuff question, and then you give your off the cuff answer. And Jen, do you want to go first since you're the one with the major class?
I have to warn you. I haven't been like debate prepped, like a presidential candidate. So if you have gotcha questions, hopefully I won't go on to like either lying or making false campaign promises or some kind of incoherent stream of consciousness that we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, we're not usually trying to get anyone, but
Right.
Occasionally people have to pause for a minute.
And I'm not running for any presidency. I am. My level of service to the university and discipline is is way over capacity already.
Amen.
I hear that.
Right? You know what I'm talking about.
For sure. All right, so here's my rapid fire question. Is there a film music example that you love, but you would never use in class?
So, yeah, there's this kind of embarrassing element, or an embarrassing chapter in John Williams' filmography when he was still kind of cutting his teeth, and that is the 1960s sex comedy era of his compositional output, which included films with he always approached his projects with the utmost seriousness and never condescended to the material, but there's only a certain amount of professional seriousness that can excuse a score like Not With My Wife You Don't, or The Guide for the Married Man, which is a movie just about how to commit adultery, or John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, which is probably the worst stinker in his entire output. But it has wonderful music. I mean, this sort of burlesque, Prokofievian style montages and things, and he does a Beach Boys approximation in one score. It's all great, but no, I would not. Not in a music theory class. Maybe in a sort of history of film music class.
There you go.
With a few necessary trigger warnings attached. Yeah.
That makes me wish that John Williams could score like the next Judd Apatow movie.
Yeah. He did his first podcast for the Smartless, which is the Jason Bateman and Will Arnett, and I can't remember the people who are associated with Arrested Development and sitcoms, right. and generally their podcast is very raunchy, and you could tell that they were holding back, cracking really inappropriate jokes. And I think he's got a great sense of humor. I think he would have been maybe slightly bemused but not offended if it had gone blue. I don't know. I would never crack a dirty joke in front of that man.
That's great. Well, I'm gonna have to check those movies out, or at least read the descriptions. Maybe not watch them, but maybe try to find the music, because I knew nothing about this period, the sex comedy period for John Williams. All right. Well, I'll go ahead, Ben. I'll give you the last one. All right. So my question is, so I've stumbled upon Suno, Suno, which is an AI website that generates music, and like it's very bland, but it's effective, and it actually you can give it lyrics or it will make its own lyrics and it'll sing. And I used it actually in one of my oral skills classes this week, and we did like a dictation. Like we just like, let's plug in some things and let's like do some harmonic dictation, because the progressions are very standard and things like that. My question is, are we ever going to come to a point where humans are no longer composing for film or multimedia? And if that's the case, what do we do as music theorists?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can offer as amusing an answer to that question. I'm a bit pessimistic, actually. I think it's likely as a cost-saving measure, at least at first, and maybe further down the line as audiences become insensible to the difference between actual human-created versus AI-generated music, that it will simply be an aesthetic consideration that AI-generated music will become a norm. It's something that people in the industry, especially younger composers, people who don't necessarily have name recognition, are rightly very concerned about, because these tools have we didn't really see it coming. I think we should have, but the rapidity with which these tools have developed is shocking, and for a lot of screen texts that require music that are multimedia of some sort, screen music media. Having music that just fits is maybe more important than having really original or groundbreaking or distinctive music. And unless you're writing at the top of your game in terms of renown, then you're in danger. That said, I don't think that anything could ever certainly would never be able to truly replace a human. I'm very committed to that. I think it's a sort of deeply worrying and maybe even horrifying thought that we wouldn't, as a species, want to have new music created for our enjoyment and our flourishing. I can't say. Like I said, I'm a little bit pessimistic, and I know that people who are really on the cutting edge of this are either very deluded or very concerned. And as someone who works on analysis and education based on this music, then perhaps the bright side is that it would be cool to see if it's possible with this machine learning stuff. It's all very opaque, like the black box conceit, where we don't really know what these large language models are doing with the music they hear. We don't know what they understand, but if we can kind of figure out, based on close analysis of the music that comes out of these boxes, it could actually be kind of revealing, in a way, right? It could show us things that we, with our systems and our own blinders, might not quite pick up on, that that the chat GPTs of music are actually able to figure out. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, because my background is composing, and I do a lot of choral composing and things, which I'm like, okay, choral composition seems a little safe still. I don't think choir directors are running to AI to generate choir music, but it is something that is certainly you need to be mindful of, and the power of those AI systems are intriguing and kind of scary, but also, as you talked about it, you made me think of like, well, maybe there will be a point where we can analyze the style of ChatGPT versus the style of Claude and Gemini.
It's actually genuinely interesting.
Yeah.
And I've seen a few talks, music theory conferences, people just beginning to probe this. Sometimes there's a bit of like techno optimism that rubs me the wrong way with some of these stuff, because again, I think it's unacceptable, honestly, that we would give up this part of what it means to be human, which is creative expression through music. And I fear that we're just sort of too willingly giving this up because it's happening so fast, or it saves money, or people who are involved in the creation of these products don't really care about musical originality.
Yeah.
Sorry for the downer.
No, I that's totally my fault. I really brought that down with that question. Ben, bring us back up.
Mine's considerably less philosophical. It may be more just funny. I don't know. I was going to ask Celesta versus Celeste versus Celeste. No. But since we already mentioned it so many times.
I change it up sometimes. Like I just like, statistically, I'll get it right one day, right?
Maybe I can go with motif, motive, or motive.
Yeah, that's right. So I say leitmotif, but leitmotivic.
Oh.
Okay.
I don't know if there was ever any style guide that led me to that particular choice, but yeah, leitmotif as singular and leitmotivic as an adjective. Never leitmotific, and what I really don't like is leitmotif without the e, which feels like I'm just including the German for some reason. When it's funny, actually, to sidetrack us a little bit here, if you have time. I don't do it, but my wife plays the New York Times Spelling Bee game, and very recently it's essentially Boggle, right? It gives you a set of letters. You need to come up with a word, and the longest word in a given set of letters is the ultimate goal for the day. And a few weeks ago there was a scrambled bunch of letters, and the longest word, the pangram, was leitmotif. And so I got a couple of friends of mine actually texting me saying, "Oh, you got to check out the spelling bee today. You're gonna love it." But apparently, in the corners of the internet that people talk about and obsess about and critique New York Times word puzzles, this was a huge scandal because a lot of people thought, this is too technical a word. I've never heard what a leitmotif is. You're using music jargon here. I am of the mind that it is a word that is, it's not purely within musical disciplines. You hear it in literary terms, or even just, maybe not man on the street, but if I could have my way, everyone in the world would know about this most important concept, this most amazing accomplishment of music history. Thank you. Not Wagner. He didn't use the word himself. I guess he sort of sanctioned it. But yeah, there are hot takes based on the word leitmotif, not leitmotiv, not leitmotivic, or if with only the F and no E. I don't know exactly what to make of it. Maybe I'll create some article, where they just do like a cultural archaeology of spelling bee and the word leitmotif and what it tells us about the world of in 2024, what people really care about. In time of crisis, the word leitmotif is at the center of it all.
We need something to distract us, from
exactly
all the other stuff going on.
Exactly.
Yes, 100%.
Tempests and teapots. That's basically what all music theory is sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my! I could tell you what I'm teaching this semester in my graduate seminar, and you'd definitely be able to appreciate that. Methods of music analysis, Schenker and PC set theory. Talk about teapots.
Oh boy.
They get very tempestuous, right?
Yes.
Fun times.
Yeah, enjoy that time in that teapot all semester long. Well, this has been really a treat, Frank, to chat with you about all of your work and such great insights. And we really appreciate all the things that you've done to make this music more accessible to the theory world and to people that are studying music and things. And so we always just like to end with, if you want to be found on the internet, letting folks know where they might find you to learn more about you and your work. And I know you just finished this book, but maybe you have some other things going on that you're kind of thinking about, in addition to the leitmotif, all that little article. I think that could be maybe like a Vox article or something, maybe New Yorker or something.
Yeah. Well, my motto is always be analyzing, so I guess there's plenty of stuff on the horizon for me. If you're looking to see my digital footprint, I guess franklehman.com will be the place to check out. That's where all my thematic catalogs are and all the articles and things that I'm able to put up. I'm not really as active on social media as in times past. I hated to do it, but I cut cut myself away from Twitter, so you no longer have my hot takes there. Probably be for the best, my own sanity and the health of the discipline, that I removed myself from that conversation. But as far as current projects, I am working to finish the next big thing is a book on the Star Wars series, and it's called The Skywalker Symphonies, Musical Storytelling in Star Wars. And I have a contract with OUP in about a year to deliver the final manuscript, which is mostly written. It's just a sort of question of putting together all these big chunks together in a nice, coherent way. And I've got some other big stuff on the pipeline for John Williams that you'll have to stay tuned for. Hopefully there won't be another 5-year, 6-year pandemic long, after effects that draw this out. But I'm excited with what's to come in the world of film, music theory, and musicology. And I'll keep on adding my little contributions there.
Well, your contributions are great, and it made me want to ask, the complete catalog of the themes of Star Wars that you have on your website for those listeners. Like, if you want to lose an hour or two, just click on that and you will just be sucked in. Is that stuff still going to be available on your website, even with these new published works? Okay,
God,
good.
That thing is indispensable.
Those are. It's so great the way it's structured, and it's so clear, and I think that is such a great resource.
Well, you say that it's something that you could get sucked in to lose hours. No one has lost more hours than I have in putting that together. I swear, it took longer and required, in some ways, more concerted thought than my first book. Like, it's massive. I haven't updated it in a year, not because there isn't no new information I want to share, but because my version of Word no longer supports the sort of basis document. So I have to do it. There'll be another overhaul at some point. Yeah, John Williams. He's 93. He says he's retired. Then he says he's not retired. And then he's still composing. Right. I wouldn't put it past him to do another trilogy at the year. As a centenarian. I don't know.
Yeah, you're kind of hoping that he takes a break, right? Because that's more work for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So, well, it's full employment for me.
That's good. That's great. Oh man, thank you, Frank, so much. This was so fun.
Thank you. This was a ton of fun. This is the most wonderful way to end my week. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
And thanks to your listeners for putting up with this nerdy conversation.
That's what we do.
That's right.
You just made it to the end of another episode of Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review the podcast, and you can always reach us at notedoctorspodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or show ideas. Thanks for listening.